Good afternoon, everybody. It's my absolute pleasure to welcome everyone to our 5th webinar as part of the webinar series that is done in partnership with the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and ICLEI Africa. Today, the topic for today's webinar is the sustainable energy access, a critical component for a green recovery in Africa. I'd like to welcome everyone to this webinar, and it's an afternoon here in Cape Town. It might be morning or evening, depending on where you are. So welcome to this webinar. All protocols observed. I am Tara Caetano. I am a Senior Professional Officer here at ICLEI Africa. And I will be the facilitator for this webinar. In terms of how this webinar will run, we have 4 great speakers today that will give their interventions. Please feel free at any time to use the chat function that's available to you at the bottom of your screen. In the panel, you should see a chat function. To put in any questions or comments that you might have on the contents of the interventions from the speakers. And there's also a Q&A function that you'll also find at the bottom of your screen, or the bottom of the Zoom window. Please feel free to also, if you want to put questions in there, feel free to do so. The speakers can then also respond directly to your question. And then others can also like your question, which would move it up in terms of the list of priority for speakers to respond to. So if you want something to if you want your question not to get lost in the chat, please feel free to use the Q&A function that you'll also find. We also have interpretation available for this webinar. There's also a tab at the bottom of your Zoom window, which you can click on to switch from English to French. So please feel free to do so and choose the language of your language of choice. As I mentioned, we have 4 excellent speakers with us today to discuss this very important topic of sustainable energy access. Firstly, the Honourable Mayor Kianja Vincent de Paul is the political head of the Entebbe Municipal Council. His noteworthy contributions to the Entebbe Municipal Council includes the overhaul of the town's public infrastructure and the town being recognized as the leading town in Uganda for cleanliness, sanitation in 2013. Honourable Mayor Kianja also serves as the chairman for the Uganda chapter of the Lake Victoria Local Authorities Corporations, alongside local governments in Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania to address the Lake Victoria Basin environmental challenges. He is also a signatory of the Covenant of Mayors and Entebbe is also a signatory of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa. He serves as an executive for ICLEI Africa's Governance Committee and is also a board member of the China-Africa Friendship Association. Our second honourable speaker that we have today is Mayor Biyini Effila Gabriel, the Mayor of Yaoundé 4 District Municipality in Cameroon. Our Honourable Mayor of Yaoundé 4 is of Cameroonian nationality and has been with the municipality as the mayor since March of 2020. He was first deputy mayor since 2013 of Yaoundé 4. He's an economist, financial expert and accountant, and he's a senior consultant and university lecturer in several institutions in Cameroon and France. He initiated a city redevelopment dynamic by reproofing certain communal roads to improve mobility between different districts. The new municipal team also wishes to promote citizen engagement in the management of local public affairs by making Yaoundé 4 a resilient and sustainable city committed to fight against climate change. The adoption of a communal action plan in favor of access to sustainable energy and climate change in Yaoundé 4 and its validation by the Joint Research Center marks the beginning of a comprehensive project that will allow the city to achieve its ambition of reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 23% by 2030. Our next honorable speaker is Mr. Stefano Signore, the head of the C6 unit for sustainable energy and climate change of the European Commission's Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development. Mr. Stefano Signore is Italian. He's a qualified lawyer. He spent his early part of his career working on banking supervision at the Italian Central Bank. He joined the European Commission in the year 2000, and as of 2004, he has worked in the area of migration, and also between 2004 and 2008, he worked in the private office of the European Commission Vice President, leading on justice, freedom, and security issues. He became head of unit in 2009 in the Directorate General for Justice, Freedom, and Security. Working in the Directorate General for Home Affairs in 2010, he oversaw programming in the areas of migration, asylum, external borders, and visa policy, as well as organized crime and police cooperation. In 2015, he moved to the Commission's Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development, where he was in charge until 2019 of the thematic work in migration and employment. Currently, he leads the thematic work area on sustainable energy and climate change. And last but definitely not least is our fourth honorable speaker, Engineer Benson Mwakina, who is from Kenya. Kenya also has at least 2 signatories of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, and also a number of cities and local governments that are members of ICLEI Africa. Engineer Benson Mwakina is an electrical engineer with 30 years postgraduate experience in public services, having graduated from the University of Nairobi in Kenya in 1990. He is trained both locally and internationally on renewable energy technologies, project formation, feasibility study analysis, environmental impact analysis, contract management, and funding. He's currently is with the Ministry of Energy as Senior Principal Superintending Engineer, and was promoted to his current position as Director of Renewable Energy in July 2017, where he heads the Alternative Energy Division. I'm sure you would agree we have a panel of really extremely honorable guests to speak to this very important topic. And without further ado, I would like to hand over to Ms. Megan Spires, who is a Senior Manager of the Climate Change, Energy and Resilience Group here at ICLEI Africa. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Tara. We thought it would be useful to maybe just spend 1 or 2 minutes creating some context around why we felt this webinar on energy access is particularly important. But I also just wanted to spend a moment highlighting how this partnership between the Covenant of Mayors Sub-Saharan Africa and ICLEI Africa in running these webinars during these particularly tough COVID times has been able to influence stakeholders from across the continent. Together, we've hosted 18 different webinars, and these webinars have reached 110 countries, over 370 cities. We've had over 2,000 attendees and also over 2,000 hours of attention. And so this for us is extremely useful to reflect on, and we do hope to take these webinars forward for the rest of the year and also into next year. So maybe as a bit of context, just to move to the next slide, we know that in Africa that there are 565 million people that still lack access to electricity. And this is particularly important to highlight because it overlaps in almost a nexus fashion with issues such as poverty, and then links to health pandemics like COVID-19. In essence, if you as an individual do not have access to energy, it means you are more vulnerable to climate change impacts, and it means you're more vulnerable to health pandemics such as COVID-19. And so this is a nexus issue that really needs to be tackled with urgency on the continent, and thus is the focus of today's webinar. I think it's also important to note that in many ways, Africa has been slightly less affected in terms of numbers by COVID-19. But in fact, the major impacts have really related to things that are socioeconomically related. And the lockdowns really affecting the economies of many, many countries from a socioeconomic perspective. And some recent commentary has said things like between 40 and 60 million people are expected to be pushed into extreme poverty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And it's, I suppose, unsurprising then that Sub-Saharan Africa, with the energy access issues that it faces, as well as the climate change impacts that it faces, will be the hardest hit in terms of this poverty. And the estimations are that around 23 million people on this continent will be pushed into extreme poverty due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Then to link this to what potential opportunities exist, there is a lot of discussions at a global and regional level in terms of how COVID-19 and the response to it is also an opportunity to build back better. And many are speaking about 3 different types of ways in which countries and regions can respond. Response, which is where some countries are still at in terms of emergency measures in the short term, recovery, socioeconomic measures in the medium term, but then redesign. And how is this an opportunity for us to reflect as people, both in terms of COVID-19, but also climate change and energy, and encourage paradigm shifts and a shift in how structurally economies are managed, and in this way build back better. So there is much discussion around investing in renewable energy, investing in energy efficiency, moving away from fossil fuel subsidies actually poses an opportunity for countries and for cities to have a competitive advantage and to ensure greater energy security. And I'm really excited to hear from the mayors and directors and Mr. Signore in reflecting how this opportunity can be harnessed on this continent in particular. Then in terms of socioeconomic benefits, in terms of the shift and response to COVID-19 and climate change and energy, it's also important to note that it makes sense for multiple reasons. There have been many studies that have proven that health centers that have access to renewable energy and energy efficiency deliver better health services to their communities. It has been proven that investing in clean energy creates 3.5 times the jobs that investing in fossil fuel industries do. It's been proven that for every $1 spent on modern cooking fuels, this results in $9 of benefit to attach to that. And then of course, what's on the current slide, the link to gender, that wages for women with access to energy are 59% higher than those without. So we really see, as the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa and as ICLEI Africa, this issue of energy access as crucial for the continent, and one that has to be tackled with urgency and fervor. And so I'll hand back over to Tara to move on to our speakers who we really are going to learn from today. Thanks, Tara.
Thanks, Megan. So to move on with the honourable speakers that we have as part of our webinar today, it's my pleasure to introduce interviews that were done with Mayor Vincent de Paul Kayanja, the Mayor of Entebbe Municipality. And then following that, the interviews done with Mayor Gabriel Biyini Effila, the Mayor of Yaoundé 4 in Cameroon. As a reminder to everyone and those that may have joined after I said this, please feel free to choose your language of choice. There is interpretation available. The bottom of your Zoom screen, you should see interpretation, and you can change it between English and French. And also please feel free to use the chat function and the Q&A function to input questions that you might have for the speakers for the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. Thanks. Now over to the interviews, please.
Okay.
Good morning, Mayor Kiyanja. Thank you so much for joining us on the final of the Covenant of Mayors Sub-Saharan Africa webinar series, specifically focused on sustainable energy access. May I please ask you to introduce yourself to our audience today?
My name is Kayanja Vincent Dipo, Mayor in Entebbe Municipal Council in Uganda, East Africa. And besides that, I'm also the chairman, Lake Victoria Regional Local Authorities and Counties Corporation, a network of local government across the Lake Victoria Basin covering Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania. But I'm also a member of the executive of ICLI Africa. I'm glad to be part of this family because together we can make a difference in regard to the challenges we have as the citizens of this globe. And one of the critical interventions is how we approach the energy challenge and the related puzzles on that. I'm glad to be part of this interaction.
Thank you so much, and we greatly appreciate your time and insights today. So to start, could you please share what lessons you have learned regarding the energy sector in Entebbe through the impact of COVID and the city's response to the pandemic?
Thank you, Becca, for this question. During the COVID season, it was a new challenge, in fact, in the history of the world. And since we who are live right now, this was a completely different situation. So we are encountering a situation that was unique. To be specific regarding to the energy sector, I can first of all give an overview of in regard to energy. About 94% of our people rely on electricity, and about 1% on solar, and then the 4% relies on paraffin. But in regard to cooking, 30% of our population relies on electricity in regard to cooking, and then 10% relies on gas, and then the 60% in regard to cooking rely on charcoal and firewood. So during this pandemic, there was a big challenge because we are in a system where energy is prepaid, especially electricity. And therefore, the system of prepayment could not be adjusted amidst the challenges of COVID, where people had been impacted on negatively, particularly those in the private sector. People could not earn a living, no more salaries, no more business, lockdown for about 3 months. And this brought a lot of challenges in people's private lives, especially the electricity providers had that system of prepayment. So you either have money and have access to power. You don't have money, there is no remedy for that. So for those that were relying on that and had no money, they had to adjust and abandon the electricity and then resort to simple alternatives that are practical in the situation that you don't have money to pay the electricity company. So it brought a lot of challenges. But amidst these challenges that we had in the energy sector, it also aroused creativity within our community, because those that were relying on charcoal and firewood, again, the supplies of these were inadequate, but besides also, the income of the people was also not flowing well. So this led to efforts of preserving and efficiency in usage of electricity and also any energy source. But as a result, creativity became one of the solutions to this challenge. So people had to abandon foodstuffs that take long to get ready, but also devise means of alternatives of energy. Earlier on, we had promoted the use of briquettes, but people couldn't see its relevance. But during the COVID season and the energy crisis, every other family resorted to briquettes. They looked for the charcoal dust. They looked for waste that could be turned into materials that can make briquettes. And as a result, many families are making briquettes as an energy alternative. And therefore, the critical lesson from this situation is that we have to promote briquette making seriously and get into a new normal of waste to wealth, from waste to briquettes, and as a result, you save, but at the same time, you reduce on the consumption of charcoal and also firewood. So this is a critical lesson that we've learned, and we are going to promote briquette making critically. But then also at family level, many people had to adjust such that they save energy, and they had to get into practices that would be efficient. Efficiency in the usage of energy. But also, this COVID challenge brings us to a scenario of also focusing on solar. Because at the town, we have solar lights, and these solar lights were on full time. And for individuals who had a solar system, they had no setback at all. They were in a comfort zone, enjoying the sun, enjoying the fruits of the sunshine through solar. And the COVID situation has indicated to us that one of the practical and the relevant solutions to the energy challenge is going solar. You go solar, you are getting into a system that is efficient and reliable. As you are aware, here in Uganda, sunshine is almost the year in, year out. And therefore, whoever has a solar facility, then is spot on. You can't get into challenges of prepaid meters, challenges of scarcity of firewood, and also scarcity of charcoal. And therefore, as I conclude this question, the solution and lessons learned from the COVID challenge is let us go solar and let us promote briquettes. But also on the side of government, there is a challenge of flexibility in a crisis. The policy of government via the company that provides the electricity was having prepaid meters. Ideally, there would have been a subsidy on electricity and also apportioning some free units to the community, because these are public facilities, and during moments of crisis, there's a need for government to stand with the residents, with the people of Uganda. So that intervention was lacking. Everything went as normal, as was normal, and therefore no subsidy was enjoyed. Therefore, we've got to lobby the central government such that in moments of crisis, they can come in to stand with the people and journey with them in challenging situations like the COVID challenge we had.
Thank you very much, Mayor Kenyanja. I think what's really great to hear about the lessons is it's not only Entebbe forging the path on their own, but rather seeing how you can bring others with you through regional and national cooperation. This goes on to my final question for you today, is that we understand that Entebbe has taken a unique approach to developing your sustainable energy access and climate action plan as part of being a COMSA signatory, as you are partnering with the Kampala Capital City Authority on this development process. For our participants today, can you reflect on what has made this a successful approach to CERCAP development and how you think other cities can benefit from taking a regional approach to energy access and climate action?
Working as a single entity, you are not appealing to the national and international community, but working together under a network, you create synergies of the technical team, synergies of a solution that cuts across a larger jurisdiction, and via that, any ideas you come with become appealing. And therefore, with the issue of sustainability, it's critical that there is replicating that across the board. And when you work as a region, as a metropolitan, then the journey to sustainable energy use becomes easier and has a clear context. Because most of these challenges we face are a bit similar. But when we work in isolation, then it becomes hard for us to attract partners, to implement policies that will make a difference in people's lives. So there are a lot of synergies that we get through regional networking. And these synergies help us create local capacity, help us come up with regional solutions to the challenges, and also promote partnerships at the regional level that are workable and practical, that can easily translate to the ordinary people. Because at the end of the day, impacting on the ordinary people is the way to go if we strive for sustainability. And specifically via this interaction with the Kampala is a higher local government, and therefore we get a lot of benefit in working with them. Benefits of experts, benefits of visibility as a capital city, and the benefits of even building our local capacity through what they have already achieved. And therefore, I strongly recommend all of us local leaders to always strive to have regional networks that we work with. Because the principle of sustainability and the principle we have in Italy is small action at the local level impacting globally. And therefore, small action at the local level impacting regionally. And therefore, if we can journey together as a region, benchmarking and also fast-tracking any initiative becomes easy. And as the resolutions at the UN and also other platforms of advocating for climate change and sustainability, we are encouraged to go subnational and also to go local. And therefore, such a practice as we've agreed with the KCCA is the way to go. And I appeal to other local authorities and cities that let us create synergies of working with others. It doesn't cost anything. but rather the benefits are enormous.
Thank you very much, Maria Kanyanja. I think that is a wonderful place for us to pause this interview for today. And I look forward to hearing the questions and answers that we'll be receiving from our participants. I just want to finish by really saying a big thank you to you for your time, for your insights. I mean, I personally have also learned a lot, and it's been great to learn more about the work and priorities of Entebbe and the leading role that you're playing on the continent. So thank you so much. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Becca.
Premièrement, Monsieur le maire, dans le contexte actuel de la crise sanitaire de la Covid-19 qui met à mal les économies nationales et municipales, pourriez-vous nous préciser comment le secteur énergétique de votre ville prospère pendant cette
First and foremost, Mr. Mayor, in the current context of the COVID-19 health crisis, which is endangering local and national economies, tell us how the energy sector within your city has been prospering during the crisis. Well, the energy sector during the pandemic has been taking into account the fact that in the 4th district of Yaoundé, as part of the CACAP plan designed by the Joint Research Center, I hope you're following.
Tout à fait.
Bear with me. Yes, I'm following you.
Alors, ce plan
Well, this
a révélé que
plan
35,4%
showed that 35.94% of the population has access to electricity.
exclut bien évidemment les ménages
And this
ayant
percentage
illégalement
excludes
accès à l'énergie.
the number of households that have access to
0,05.
energy illegally. Because if we take this into account,
Tandis que les 39,7%,
this figure sits higher at 59.05%. 5.4%
et
of
présente ainsi les risques
households
et les problèmes
use
sanitaires. Ainsi,
other
pour revenir à votre question, le secteur
electricity
énergétique
means
bouleversé par la pandémie, le coronavirus,
39.7% use biomass or firewood
en mettant
or
la
charcoal.
consommation
Charcoal
d'électricité
dust
a augmenté dans les
increases the
ménages
health
à
crisis
cause du confinement.
and takes us
Ça a
back to the
entraîné la
question
hausse des factures.
of the energy sector because it has really been shaken
Les
by the
ménages incapables
COVID-19
de payer ces
pandemic.
factures se sont résolus à l'utilisation
A lot of households have not been able to pay their energy bills
Pour ce
during
qui
the
des
COVID-19
entreprises, se
crisis.
sont vus
And
perdre
the families that were not able to pay the bills had to resort
ainsi la chute de la
to charcoal,
consommation d'électricité.
charcoal or sawdust or lamp oil.
Certains étaient dans l'obligation ainsi de fermer ou de revoir les contrats
Some
d'affaires
companies
à défaut de les suspendre.
had to let go of most of their employees, which resulted in a decrease in energy consumption and a drop in production. Some companies had to either close down or even revise their remuneration
Ce n'est un secret
when
pour
they did not
personne
have to
que les
suspend them.
populations les plus vulnérables
Thank you very much. This is not a
manque d'accès à
surprise to
l'énergie
anyone. The most vulnerable populations have been more hardly hit by the lack of access to energy and the lack of clean cooking means during the pandemic. Could you tell us about the lessons that you have drawn from the crisis?
Et quel plan la commune de Yaoundé
And
4
what
a mis en place
plan
pour
the
relancer efficacement le secteur de l'énergie?
City of Yaoundé 4 has put into place
Les
in order to
conséquences de cette
redynamize the
pandémie
energy
pour tout d'abord leur solution
sector.
dans le plan climat-énergie de la ville, qui est
Well,
le
first, the
premier plan
solutions
climat
can
et
be found in the
Sub-Saharan
energy and climate plan of the
qui a
city.
été validé le 9 septembre
It
2020
has been approved
par le
on
GIEC.
September 9th,
Par contre, le
2020
plan
by the
couvre
Joint Research Center.
l'adaptation, l'atténuation.
However, the current plan has different pillars when it comes to
Pour
mitigation
les
and adaptation and access to sustainable
de
energy.
l'accès à l'électricité et à la
Looking at
le
access to
plan a
energy and to
prévu un certain
clean
nombre de
cooking methods.
réalisations dans les projets dont je vais vous citer les noms.
And there are different projects, especially when it comes to
La
energy
solarisation,
access.
c'est-à-dire l'installation de
Let me
panneaux
begin by talking about
sur les toits de
solar panels
bâtiments
that were
municipaux
fitted on the roofs of 30 municipal buildings. We are also planning on installing 3,000 street lamps in the 65 neighborhoods of the 4th district of Yaoundé.
La distribution de 3600.
We are also going to distribute 3,600 kits for solar panels to the most unprivileged families of the city. And fourth, we are going to incentivize 50 companies from the primary and secondary sector to carry out energy audits. Fifth, we are going to organize the construction of industrial biogas plants to supply energy to the city, as well as four neighboring cities. And finally, we are going to implement and
Cependant, pour ce qui concerne la cuisson propre, nous avons
biogas stations in the district community of Yaoundé 4. However, when it comes to clean cooking, we are going to build biogas plants, as I said, in the 4th community of Yaoundé. And finally, we are going to distribute 20,000 improved cook stoves to offer access to energy and promote energy-saving cooking methods. Thank you very much. It looks like you have made significant commitments at city level in order to make energy more affordable and more accessible. Could you tell us about the challenges Yaoundé 4 has been confronted with in order to raise funds
de projets énergétiques? Est-ce que des plans ont été mis en place pour générer des fonds?
Have you put into place financial plans in order to raise funds internally and within the municipality? Well, I would like to start by saying that a climate and energy plan has been designed by the city. However, this plan has been facing several challenges. First, challenges in terms of communication, because the plan needs to be presented to national stakeholders, and it has to be made understandable by these national stakeholders and international stakeholders. Secondly, the challenge of support. We need to identify our technical and financial partners. And third, we need technical support to meet the technical challenges, because we need to have capacity building and also mobilize more human resources at city level in order to draft the documentation for this type of projects. We also need support for the maturation of these processes, rather the maturation process of these projects. And fifth, we need financial support, because we are facing financial challenges. We need to be able to have access to our own resources and mobilize our resources. Or rather, we need a good policy of mobilization of these resources, as well as of the resources of our partners. We also must put into place and design a financial model for these projects. We also need support for the feasibility study, and in order to raise funds, we need to have energy studies, which, by the way, has already been carried out. Secondly, we need an energy and climate plan, which has already been designed and approved by the Joint Research Center. And thirdly, the study
avec le FECOM,
the pre-feasibility study for the pilot projects has already been carried out. And fourth, we need a business plan as well as a pre-feasibility study for the industrial project, and it has already been carried out. So this is what we have already done. And we also need, for this type of project, we need an agreement and conventions, and it has already been signed in order to raise 150 million CFA francs. We have different partnerships that have already been signed, and some that are decentralized, and some big partnerships have been created.
Tout à fait.
This is what I have to say about the different challenges.
Toutes ces précisions.
Thank you very much.
Enfin, en tant que signataire de la Convention des maires,
these details, and finally, as a signatory of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, the fourth district of the Yaoundé municipality,
la toute première commune à
have seen your CACP plan approved, and therefore you are the first city to have its plan approved. And with this interview, we wanted to seize this opportunity to congratulate you warmly on behalf of the COMSA
qui
to
est
congratulate you, but also your municipal
pour
team,
la ville,
because this is a major
mais aussi
milestone, not only for the
pour
city
l'ensemble
of
du
Yaoundé, but
programme
more
de la
generally
COMSAP,
for
puisque
the
votre
whole
expérience sera
COMSAP
essentielle
program, because
pour les
your
futures
experience
villes qui développeront leur
will
PAEDC.
be
Encore
essential
une fois,
for the cities that
vos
will
félicitations. Et
design their
pour rebondir là-dessus,
CACP
d'une part,
in the
pourriez-vous
future,
nous
and they will be
exposer un
able to
peu quelle a
tap
été
into
votre
your
expérience
experience.
quant à
Now, I would like you to
l'élaboration
tell
du
us
pilier
a little bit
d'accès à l'énergie
about
durable au sein du PAEDC et
the
d'autre part,
access to
quels sont
sustainable energy
à
and
peu
how
près
you were
3
able
questions
to
clés que vous
design
voulez
this pillar as
partager
part of
avec
this
les villes qui viennent de
CACP.
démarrer ou
And
qui n'ont
finally,
pas encore
could you
commencé
tell
à
us
développer
about the
ce
key
pilier d'accès à l'énergie?
lessons learned
Madame,
that you would
je
like to
dirais
share
que
with the cities that have
l'expérience
just started to
est très
design
édifiante
their
pour ce qui concerne
pillar on
la
access to
modeste personne.
sustainable energy?
C'est ainsi que parmi ces expériences acquises, la
Well,
première d'entre elles, ça a été de constater la grande participation
from
de
my
la population
experience,
dans la
what really
gestion des affaires
struck
publiques de
me
leur localité.
is the
La
fact that the
deuxième,
population
c'est à
was
travers
very
la
much
collecte et
engaged in the
l'analyse des
management
données
of
en
public
matière d'accès
affairs
à
of the city.
l'énergie.
And
La
secondly, I'd
troisième,
like to talk
c'est faite
about
au
data
niveau de
collection
la
in terms
collecte,
of energy
la
access.
valorisation
And
des
thirdly,
municipaux,
the collection and
et enfin la mise
valorization
sur
of
pied des projets
municipal
d'énergie.
waste.
Quant aux leçons clés, bon, tout d'abord, il y a
This
l'élaboration
was
du
what
plan
really struck me. Now, with regards to
de la
the
quête
key lessons
participative,
learned,
en associant
first,
tous les
I'd
acteurs.
like to highlight the fact that you need to
Il
have a
faut également
collaborative
noter
approach, and as
que
much as
faire
possible,
vivre la
you need to
synergie
include and engage all the different
parallèles,
stakeholders,
c'est très important,
as
comme
well
vous
as
l'avez
social
compris.
stakeholders, more
Et
specifically.
enfin,
Besides, you should really resort to
voir
and call upon
ouvert
different
nos
experts
observations,
to create synergies
suggestions et
within these
partenaires
different
techniques,
expertise,
ainsi
and
que
you need to
que l'on puisse
be
créer des
open
partenariats avec
to
des
comments
organisations
from
de la
your
société
technical
civile
partners.
ayant une expertise en la
And
matière.
you should also be able and open to create
Qui
partnerships
voudrait bien
with civil
dans
society organizations, because they have a lot of expertise as well in this field. And I would like to say
Merci beaucoup pour
to the
ces
different cities
recommandations finales.
who would like to join us
L'entretien touche à sa
in
fin.
this wonderful
Merci,
group, because
Monsieur
I
le
think that
maire.
this group is extremely
Afin de
important, really
conclure,
relevant.
souhaitez-vous
To
rajouter
feel free to
quelque
contact us.
chose? Avez-vous des
Thank you
commentaires
very much for these
supplémentaires?
recommendations, and thank you.
Le dernier
This
commentaire
is
que
the
j'ai
end
fait,
of this
c'est
interview, but
d'appeler
would you like to add a final word? Well,
rejoindre ce forum de manière à pouvoir
again, I would like to
de
call upon the
compter
other
sur la
cities to join
participation
us,
active,
because
non seulement des populations, mais pour
we
assurer
need to be able to really
un
count on the
bien-être
effective
aux populations de
participation,
leur
not only of our populations, but also of our cities, in order to ensure the well-being of our populations.
Thank you again to the Honourable Mayors for their great interventions. Just some reflections from my side on those two interventions. First of all, just an important to note, a big congratulations to Yaoundé 4 in Cameroon for having the first validated Sustainable Energy Access and Climate Action Plan, CACP. And congratulations to them for not only completing the important process of doing all of the assessments that are required under a CACP, but also in identifying and prioritizing projects that they can then take forward, and also for going that further step for fundraising for these projects. I have three other reflections on those interventions. The first one being around working as a network. And I think the Mayor of Entebbe so importantly said that there are so many synergies that you can take advantage of if you're working in a network, working with each other to not only create those synergies, but you also learn from each other. You create regional solutions that could translate a little bit easier into policy, and also from a financing perspective, it's very useful in terms of bundling projects together to create the project volume that could then be interesting for financiers to look at. A second important reflection is on access to energy. And an important reminder that access is not only about availability, but when we talk about access and access to sustainable energy, we're also talking about affordability. Even if it is the case that a certain fuel type or service is available, it might not necessarily be affordable, and therefore the area of sustainable energy access, you haven't reached the point at which you have access in a particular community. So always important to think about not only availability, but also the affordability aspects. And then a third reflection on that is that especially in these trying times, and also if we reflect on climate change and the crises that we could foresee in the future due to climate change, it's important to be agile. And as both city mayors have mentioned, there is a lot of agility that they have had to make use of over the last few months, particularly. And I reflect especially on Entebbe in terms of their promotion of alternative solutions to those that might not be working during these trying times. And as a city, how you can also stand forth and take the perspective of putting political backing or promotion on alternative solutions such as solar or briquettes, as was used in the example of the mayor of Entebbe. So just some brief reflections from my side, but on to the next segment of our webinar. And I'd like to hand over to Dr. Megan Spires, who will then take us forward with the rest of the interventions. Over to you, Megan.
Thank you, Tara. Just to say, I'm seeing so much activity in the chat box and in the questions, so please keep the comments and questions coming. In particular, there are a number of comments that are coming to the panelists, but not to all attendees. So please select when you are chatting that you would like, if you would like all the attendees to see your comments, please select all panelists and attendees. I think some really useful points and personal reflections even are being made in the chat. And then of course, please use the Q&A function. As Tara said, we're now going to move into a discussion first with Mr. Stefano Signore. Mr. Signore, as said, please feel welcome. And as said, also you are the head of the Sustainable Energy and Climate Change Unit of DevCo, managing a huge amount of work across the world really on energy and climate change. And the first question we wanted to pose to you, Mr. Signore, is we know that in order for Africa to attain SDG 7, which is the Sustainable Energy Access SDG by 2030, that a significant resource mobilization is necessary. And it was on one of the first slides that we shared that there are estimations of around $29 billion a year is necessary for universal energy access on the African continent. So we would love to hear just some reflections from your side, Mr. Signore, in terms of the European Commission's approach to energy access and how it's tackling this issue in the partnership with Africa that is so strong. Thank you.
The ones mute.
And that is for these reasons that regulation maybe allow me to zoom a little bit more specifically also to the local dimension and the connection with the national one, because we know that if we look at the overall figures, 70% of the greenhouse gases emission come from cities. Similar figures are there for GDP, maybe more, and also for energy consumption. And in general, we see very little effect in this decentralization, especially when it comes to the fiscal one. That is why we think that applying innovative financial models seems to be a very challenging area. That is also, by the way, the reason why we have been supporting the Global Covenant of Mayor and also the specific Covenant of Mayor for Sub-Saharan Africa, because this is a way we can, let's say, provide support in order to basically expand the network of partners and increase, let's say, collective awareness about what is possible. However, we cannot expect the local authority have all the expertise on their own, and that is where it is important that basically the national level come into place, and also that national funding, let's say, has to be there in order to set the policy tone, but also to provide seed funding, know-how, and capacity building. And that is also why cities start with elaborating, for instance, the SIACAP, which have been mentioned, the Sustainable Energy Access and Climate Action Plan. So as basically they are assisted to define their needs and opportunities, and with this plan basically constitute a key document that shows how a covenant signatory will reach its commitment. At the financing level, of course, we are confident that the Covenant of Mayor can also shed some light into the possibilities to finance cities in the African context, such as, local authorities' own financial resources, grants that can be national or donor-based, local taxes, soft loan, and other more complex possibilities, such as green bonds, public-private partnership, and revolving funds. So there are great opportunities for the private sector to enter into agreement with cities directly, such as smaller concession schemes or public-private partnership could give win-win solutions to problems such as waste, mobility, and energy. But such agreement needs strong central level backing and assistance to local authorities to manage them and protect the public interest as a whole. I was mentioning earlier on the European Investment Plan, External Investment Plan, and there are a number of guarantee schemes which target specifically the city dimension that we are carrying out with a number of financial institutions. And because we know that much of the intervention in terms of infrastructure and service deployment have to take place in cities. Moreover, we are also supporting, for instance, sustainable mobility solutions through Mobilize Your City partnership, seeking to develop sustainable urban mobility plans, which is currently being piloted in a number of our partner countries. So we have put in place a range of other facilities which in general want to help cities strengthen their capacity and sector plans, as well as in support in the preparation of projects that may attract external finance. But we know it remains extremely complex. It's a challenge that we all have to face, and we want to focus on in the next few years. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Signore. And it must be acknowledged, just in terms of the European Commission's leadership, in terms of the Europe's Green Deal, the support of the Global Covenant of Mayors, the support of the Mayors Sub-Saharan Africa, there's really been significant investment globally and on the continent towards climate change and energy objectives, and that must really be promoted and acknowledged. We'll leave it there for now, Mr. Signore. We'll come back to you with a question from the audience. I'm seeing even more questions and comments flying in, which is wonderful. And we'll move on now to have a conversation with Engineer Mwakina, who joins us. As said earlier, he is from the Ministry of Energy in Kenya and Director of Renewable Energy there. And so we're very honored to have you with us today. In particular, we know on the African continent how much Kenya is a leader in terms of renewable energy and energy efficiency. And our first question to you, sir, is if you could reflect a little bit in terms of the policy landscape in Kenya. We know that you have a strong national energy plan. We know that there are strong county energy plans. So there's an element of strong multi-level governance and localization of climate change and energy work. And these policy landscapes, or the environment that has been created and led by the government in Kenya, has really promoted strong renewable energy and energy efficiency in practice. And this is, I'm sure, helped you as a country to also cope during the COVID-19 pandemic. So just some reflections in terms of your policy landscape and how these policy enablers have allowed Kenya to be a leader on the continent and perhaps globally too in terms of energy and climate change.
Yeah, thank you very much. As you have rightly put it, Kenya has a new Energy Act, which was enacted in 2019, that's last year. And the Act has put a lot of emphasis on renewable energy and energy efficiency. Still, it has also devolved some the planning of the energy from just the national to have energy plans from the counties, and also from the other sectors, the energy sectors. Currently, to operationalize the Energy Act 2019, there's a task force that is working on the implementation of the Act to ensure that the regulations are in place. And as per the Act, the Cabinet Secretary of Energy is the one who is charged with the consulting with the stakeholders to publish the plans from the counties and the other stakeholders, so as to consolidate them into the national energy plan. So currently we do not have the county plans because the task force is still in place and they are working on that. But we are still guided by the least cost power development plan, and that's what has enabled us to go through this COVID time. We have, of course, the COVID has brought a number of challenges. There have been a number of changes, even in the electricity sector, taking into account that there have been fewer hours of working. So that means that the demand for electricity really went down. And so the Ministry of Energy constituted a technical committee to analyze the effects of the COVID-19 and also to recommend mitigating measures for those effects. So a COVID-19 management plan was set in place in the energy sector, and which is being implemented now. So currently we can rightfully say that we have gone through this area without any disruption in the energy sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Engineer. Very useful to hear how the policy landscape has enabled so much work. The second question is in relation to really you just sharing, maybe even from a personal perspective, what has been some of the secrets behind the success in Kenya in terms of promotion of renewable energy and energy efficiency? We know that in terms of a country in comparison to others on the continent, there's a relatively high rate of electrification. And we know that there's, as you've said, very strong energy policy and regulation framework. So just if you could reflect a little bit in terms of the history, how the country has got to this point, firstly, and then second of all, do you, from your perspective, have any advice for other African cities and nations, many of which are joining us in this webinar now and will listen to the recording afterwards, in terms of how to take these steps towards, one, better energy access, and two, that this energy comes from renewable sources?
Yes, thank you very much. And maybe I should start by saying that the policies that have been put in place by the government of Kenya is what has brought in the environment for the investors, both locally and internationally, to have an interest in Kenya. We have, first of all, made efforts to ensure that all renewable energy sources have been mapped out. And currently in Kenya, you will be able to have the maps for all the renewable energy sources, from geothermal, wind, solar, biomass. All the sources have been mapped out. So for any investor who would want to invest in renewable energy, they'll be able to know which resource is available and in which place. And then the government will also assist with the policies like letters of support to ensure that the investor is really covered in some risks. More than that, we also have the Kenya National Electrification Strategy of 2018, which also gives the plan by the government to ensure that's part of the policy which the government would want to have universal access to electricity by the year 2022. And in that, we are supposed to deploy all the technologies, because we cannot extend the grid to all parts of Kenya. That means we will have to use some off-grid technologies. We have to use solar, wind, and the other technologies which can be put in place, especially areas which are very far from the grid. We have some islands which are also very far from the grid. Now, the target is by the year 2022, we want to have a universal access to electricity. Currently, we are at about 75%. We also have the least cost power development plan for 2017 to 2037. It is also addressing the same issues of electricity access. We also have another strategy called the last mile connectivity, which ensures that all transformers are fully populated, and any area where the grid can be extended will also be extended to ensure that all those people around that place are connected to electricity. The off-grid system is also, in fact, encouraged by one big project that we are undertaking currently called the Kenya Off-Grid Solar Access Project. This is funded by the World Bank, and it is also supposed to deliver some mini-grids, solar home systems, clean cooking, because we are also working on clean cooking as part of our SDG 7 goals. Okay, we are operating a number of mini-grids currently in the country. That is like Kenya Power and Lighting Company is operating 29 mini-grids, which are far from the grid. The Rural Electrification and Renewable Energy Corporation, which is also one of the parastatals under the Ministry of Energy, is currently developing 25 solar mini-grids. So all that coupled with the National Electrification Strategy, with our development partners who are funding a number of mini-grids. The development partners funding include the World Bank, AFD, DFID, and NDF. With all that put together, we believe that we'll continue being a leader, especially in our region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Engineer. I personally have so many follow-up questions, but I want to rather allow questions that have come from the audience because we've been inundated with them. So I'm not going to waste any time. Over to you, Tara. Let's get the questions to the panelists. Thank you so much, Engineer.
Welcome.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Megan. I can, also say that we have so many great questions. We will also do as much as possible to get your questions to the speakers if we don't have time to respond to them today. So the first question that I have here is for Mr. Stefano Signore. For the topic, despite the key role of local governments, many national governments have problems to value and recognize their role and allow for them to act effectively. So building sustainable African cities needs first to empower our local as sustainable institutions with the ability to make choices and get funding for their local climate action plans without being blocked by the national government. In addition to the current support to African cities, I think we must continue the fight for decentralization as a tool and means to reach sustainable development goals within the continent. Can you comment on this from your experience?
Yeah, I think, look, I think that this is an evidence that we need to focus more on the city dimension, in the sense that the more we will be able to work on the wider urban development agenda, urbanization agenda in all its components, the more we will be able also to address in an effective way the topics that we are discussing here today. I think that many times when we tackle these issues from a sectorial perspective, this may face some limitations. So definitely I think that we need to enlarge our agenda and to look, as I said, at a wider, let's say, urban policy framework. That is what we want to do as much as possible in the next financial framework. But it would be a mistake to do this only by, let's say, working on the city dimension, which of course, as I said, we want to do more, because we also need to work with national governments in order to, let's say, promote the urban agenda, because we know very well that there are a number of issues that we cannot, let's say, modify a law, nor the mayors in the cities can do, but only the national government can address. So, let's say, in combination with the wider, let's say, urban agenda that we want to develop, we also need to bring this conversation in the conversation we will have with the government, with the national government. And probably we haven't done this sufficiently so far. So I think these are the two things that should be done in combination in order to be more effective in addressing those challenges.
Great, thanks so much. And a second question while we have the mic on your side there, Mr. Stefano Signore. The second question is, one would be interested in inquiring if there are any types of programs and interventions for Sub-Saharan Africa, if what requirements, and I think this is around funding and financing, if so, what requirements do local authorities need to satisfy to benefit from such initiatives?
Well, I'm not sure, let's say, of course, the answer to this, it depends, because it depends what we are talking about. So it really depends, and in general, in order to be impactful and effective, as I said, we want to start from a conversation with the national government on a number of select topics where we can be transformational, we can be big, we can really make an impact on the ground. So of course, while we want to address the urban dimension and the city dimension as much as possible, we also want to avoid the fragmentation of funding with very small interventions that are not sufficiently transformational. So I would say that in fact, even the funds that will be channeled to the city dimension many times will be channeled through a number of interventions that will land on the city dimension through a transformative approach, as I said, guarantees, technical assistance, helping, let's say, to construct a pipeline of bankable projects, etc. So I would say, in this case, it really depends. We would have to delve much more into the specific of what we have in mind with the question to be able to provide, let's say, a meaningful answer.
Great, thank you so much for that response there. Another question that we've gotten, and this one can also go to Mr. Stefano Signore, and one that I also reflect on. It's a question that came from someone from Hao 1 in Togo, but also we received a question earlier from Mr. Cesaro Comiyena. And this question is around searching for funding for the development of a SEA cap. Our colleague from Togo has mentioned that they are actually a member of the Covenant of Mayors. So the request is around, how they can fund their actual SEA caps. My reflection also from there, from a secretariat perspective, the COMES SA, is that through the development development of tools, etc., we are hoping to also streamline the process of SEACAP development. So really providing tangible tools that cities can use to more quickly and more cheaply develop their SEACAP, since it's an important first step towards implementation. But now over to you, Stefano.
Oh, we are aware that, of course, the establishment of the SEACAP is only the first step. It's an important one, especially if the work is well done and there is sufficient ownership, as we see clearly in many African cities. But it's a start. I mean, it's not a goal per se. And indeed, there is always the issue, which of course is very challenging with limited resources and in many challenging situations of implementation. On this, I can be frank, of course, there is no automaticity. Let's say the fact of being signatories of having a SEACAP doesn't provide any mechanic, let's say, results in terms of accessing funding. But we know that in parallel, we've also launched a number of projects at city level. Many of those are relatively early stage of implementation. We have some 20, 25 projects overall. Get from that experience also lesson learned or benchmark way of doing that allow, let's say, to better connect the dots and put in a better position, let's say, the cities and the mayor to access funding whenever this is available from the national level, as I was saying, but also through PPP or through international donor funding. So it's more the how, let's say, we can help, as I said, connecting all these dots. There is not, for the time being, the how much, but in parallel, as I said, investing on cities will be much more than in the current financial framework, one of the big priorities that we want to pursue. So let's say the work that we are doing in the Covenant of Mayors through the SEACAP should be seen as a sort of incubator where hopefully the signatories and those who have worked on SEACAP, in our view, should be in better position to access, let's say, those possibilities when they will be there at the national level or through other mechanisms. So this is what we hope and what we have in mind. I hope that this addresses the question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Signore. Yes, indeed, that does definitely answer the questions there. I would like to move on to our Honourable Mayor of Yaoundé 4, who is also in attendance today. The South-South cooperation, this question is for you, Honourable Mayor. South-South cooperation among local authorities is paramount. Having the higher local governments mentoring lower ones and having a peer review periodically. Lavelac has designed a program in this regard as a network of local authorities in the Lake Victoria region. How are you engaging regionally on climate action in West Africa? So the question there is, Mayor, please reflect on how you are dealing with climate change at a regional level in West Africa.
Allô, vous me suivez?
Hello, can you hear me?
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Bonjour, Tara. Comment vous allez? Bonjour.
How are you?
Je veux répondre à votre question.
I would like to answer your question, but first and foremost, I would like to add something. I am in charge of the climate and energy plan because the mayor is not available today, but we have worked on the coordination of actions. And with regards to the climate and energy plan, we were one of the pioneer cities to take part in the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa. And we did our best to engage other cities. And you have over 42 Cameroonese cities that are part of the Covenant now. And the city wanted to raise awareness as much as possible amongst cities in Cameroon so that they would become signatories as well of the covenant. And there are a lot of trans-city, trans-municipal actions, because we know that we cannot work in silo, especially for the people who know the city of Yaoundé. Our city that is in a network with other cities. You cannot solve one issue in one city is interconnected with Yaoundé. So the notion, the issue of city waste, for instance, is something that we need to work on all together, just like the issue of energy. The energy and climate plan has been approved by the joint research group, but we have showed that our city pollutes a lot in Cameroon. It's probably the most highly polluting city in the country, because we have an industrial network that is bigger than any other city. And we needed to sit at the same table with different stakeholders, with the city, with the companies, but also the central government. Hence the fact that we decided to take things at a more national level. We organized the first Climate and Energy Summit, which will be organized in 2021 with the city of Yaoundé 4. So what we will tackle is how we can mobilize resources, because the issue that we are currently confronted with all the cities that have shown their interest to have an energy planning system and climate change planning, cities don't have access to fundings. This is what they're confronted with. And we were lucky because our city has been collaborating with Waidemos, which is a civil society organization, and we have collaborated with them in order to design our energy climate plan. We know that in order to create this type of plan, you need to work in collaboration, because especially organizations and civil society organizations have expertise, and you need to work with the population. Hence the fact that we have reached such success. And currently the city is now looking into how we can mobilize our different partners around this climate plan in order to leverage the different resources and therefore implement the actions that we have designed as part of this plan.
Thank you so much there, and great to see you again. I hope that you're doing well in Yaoundé 4.
I'm great, thank you.
Thanks. I now have a question that's directed to Engineer Benson Mwakina. We are in Nakuru County to support the energy pillar under the COMESSA and ICLEI Africa and GIZ work in Kenya. As African Research and Impact Network, ARIN, we are interested in knowing the progress in setting up a national county energy planning framework, which is being supported by the Ministry of Environment. So I think there, the question to you, Engineer Benson, is from a local partner that we're working with in Nakuru County. They're interested in understanding how to set up the National County Energy Planning Framework, which is currently being asked for by the national government there.
Thank you very much. I think the best way is for him to get in touch with the Minister of Energy, because right now we are already working on that. But and we can only include him in the process. As I mentioned earlier in my brief, is that we are having a task force that is working on the operationalization of the Energy Act 2019. So all the issues of county planning and what, we have a number of partners who have also expressed interest in that, and we are involving them as much as possible. So I think the African Research can also make a presentation. We are available to listen to them and see how they can fit in. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, and thank you so much for agreeing to that. What we will do is connect you. We have the email address of the partners, so we'll be definitely connect you there to take those conversations further at a bilateral level. Thank you very much, Engineer.
Welcome.
Thanks. So I think with that, it's now my pleasure to provide some closing words for the wrap up of this webinar. I think you can agree that all of the interventions that we've had here today and all of the reflections, including all of the great questions and answers that we've received via the Q&A and the chat, have really been insightful and only just started to unpack the big topic that is sustainable energy access. This webinar would not be possible without the generous sponsorship from the European Commission and also the German Ministry for Economic Development and Cooperation, BMZ. So we would like to say a huge thank you to the funders of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa for this particular webinar series, but also the other webinars that have been part of the ComSSA ICLEI Africa webinar series partnership. And I think I would like to also turn to an event that ICLEI Africa is running in November of this month. A lot of the conversations that we've had today have been around financing. There is the Local Climate Solutions for Africa Virtual Congress that's happening between the 3rd to the 12th of November in 2020. At this particular virtual Congress, we will be focusing on financing for change. That is the theme for the overall virtual Congress, and we invite all of you to register at the link given below. As part of the Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa, there will be a Covenant of Mayors in Sub-Saharan Africa Day on the 5th of November of this year, focusing solely on the Covenant of Mayors work in Sub-Saharan Africa and all of the resources and tools that have been developed to this point, as well as sharing some of the great success stories from the signatories of the Sub-Saharan African region. And we really invite you to participate actively in this virtual Congress, where we'll take a number of the conversations that we've only just started unpacking today much further. You'll hear from experts, you'll hear from financiers, you'll hear from other cities in the African region, and really this is the space for networking, for sharing lessons, and for us moving forward quickly in terms of the action that we need to take for climate change. And maybe just a reflection from my side again on the overall webinar today and the important topic that we have been tackling. We've seen that there is a lot of great action that's happening on the ground, depending on where you are as a city, whether you are beginning your planning process or if you are at the end of your planning process, such as the city of the municipality of Yaoundé 4, already at the point at which you're thinking about implementation and fundraising for that implementation. I think what can be really learned from this is that your peers are all there by your side, and we can learn so much from each other. And we can go so far in terms of picking up all of the great innovative solutions that have already been enacted on the African continent. And I hope that through a similar webinar series going forward, we can then unpack and learn from each other in that regard. As I usually do, I'd like to end with a quote today, and an African proverb. When the music changes, so does the dance. And I think that really does reflect how times have changed at this point not only with COVID, but as we move to more accelerated action in terms of climate change, but also more accelerated action in terms of investing in energy access in Africa. And I hope too that our dance also changes as we evolve and learn from our experiences. So thanks again to all of the great speakers that we've had today. Thanks again for all the participants, the active participation. We hope to see you all at Locks for Africa Virtual Congress in November, and I wish you all a good day. Thank you very much.